Breaking news, a federal judge has just found that the Trump administration has willfully disregarded one of his court orders and that probable cause exists that it is in criminal contempt of court. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started.
Paige, this is the big order we have been waiting for. In many respects, we have been dreading. A federal judge has just found that the Trump administration willfully disregarded one of his court orders and has ordered that there is probable cause to believe that there is a violation of criminal contempt. So, Paige, we are in uncharted territories, and we may very well now be in a constitutional crisis.
This order came from D.C. federal judge James Boasberg, originally a Bush appointee to the courts. This case involves the Trump administration using an 18th century wartime law to deport hundreds of Venezuelans to El Salvador. Now, a month ago, Judge Boasberg ordered the Trump administration to halt the flights to El Salvador as this case continued out in court. The Trump administration did not stop the flights, and ever since, Boasberg has been investigating to find out if the Trump administration willfully ignored his court order to stop the flights.
Yeah, this is a blockbuster development. I mean, I cannot express to you how rare it is, how absolutely extraordinary it is for a federal judge to tell the federal government, stop doing the thing you are doing. And for the federal government not only to continue to do it, but to then essentially mock the judge, tell the judge he doesn't have any power, that he doesn't understand the law, he doesn't understand his own order, and basically dare him to find that they willfully violated the order. And when you willfully violate a court order, what happens next is you are held in contempt of court. To be honest with you, the judge here is showing remarkable restraint. I mean, the judge could just say, you are in contempt, period. Instead, what the judge is doing is saying, look, I'm going to give you an opportunity to purge your contempt. I'm going to give you an opportunity to admit that what you did is wrong, fix it, and we can talk, Paige, about what that looks like, fixing it now, and afford you procedural due process. By the way, the irony here of the judge bending over backwards to give these DOJ lawyers and these other officials who were involved in the chain here, and this is going to be quite a thing to see who winds up having been in the chain of decision-making to violate this court's order. But anyway, giving them procedural rights that they have been so loath to give to anyone else, the judge is giving here because he wants to, like I said, bend over backwards to get this 100% right and not lead further into a constitutional crisis than we already are.
Right, Boasberg wrote in his opinion, the court does not reach such conclusion lightly or hastily. Indeed, it has given defendants ample opportunity to rectify or explain their actions. None of their responses have been satisfactory. Now, Boasberg also points out in his opinion that the initial order that the Trump administration has willfully ignored was later vacated by the Supreme Court. Boasberg explains that even though the TRO was vacated, the administration still had a responsibility to follow that court order until it was reversed. And while the court order was in effect, the Trump administration did not do its required actions.
That's right. And this is a fundamental principle of law, because some people out there are going to say, but if I don't understand, if the Supreme Court ultimately overturned the order, why is it a problem that the executive branch didn't follow it? It is a basic foundational principle of American law that judges get to decide what the law is. Okay, they get to decide, not Stephen Miller standing in the Oval Office, not Pam Bondi, who is, playing the role of supplicant attorney general. It's ultimately the decision, the job of the courts to say what the law is. And Judge Boasberg told the Department of Justice what the law was at that moment in time, which was to require that the plane carrying these individuals to El Salvador had to be turned around. And they ignored the court order. And so it is well-established law that if you violate a court order, it does not matter if later that court order is reversed. If you wanted to take your shot at reversing the court order, you appeal. You don't defy it. But that's what they did here. What they did here is they defied the court order. They thought that the judge wouldn't have the guts to hold them in contempt, wouldn't have the mechanisms to enforce contempt. And I know, Paige, we're going to talk about that. And that they'd get away with it. And so much of Paige of what we're seeing here in case after case after case is this effort by the Justice Department and its lawyers and the administration to think they're just going to get away with it. They're just going to bully. They're going to bully these judges, and these judges won't stand up for themselves. And good for Judge Boasberg for not backing down. You know, he gave them more than fair warning. He gave them more warning than any private litigant would get in any case in any courthouse in America. And they still went ahead and thumbed their nose at him. So good for him.
Right. Boasberg said the Constitution does not tolerate willful disobedience of judicial orders, especially by officials of a coordinate branch who have sworn an oath to uphold it. So, Marc, the question is, what happens next? What will we see next in Boasberg's court?
Yeah. So what the judge has said is that he is, like I said, going to give the administration opportunity to purge the contempt. Now, obviously, that is not going to mean flying back these prisoners who are now in El Salvador. He makes that explicit. But it may be that, for example, they say, okay, we're going to give each one of them habeas hearings. We're going to take essentially constructive custody of them from El Salvador so that these people can get their judicial process in the United States. He gives the government the opportunity to propose other ways of purging contempt. But if they don't do that, and let's be honest, what I saw in the Oval Office the other day did not suggest that the administration is likely going to want to purge its contempt. They're going to double down on this. Then what there'll be discovery and hearings. Like there will be like a mini trial in which the judge will get to the bottom of who ordered what, who made what decision making, and then there will be a sentence imposed, and that sentence can be monetary, it can be imprisonment, and that's why I've always said this is the point of constitutional crisis. It is a constitutional crisis because at this point you have the judicial branch saying to the executive branch, you know, you have willfully violated our court order, you have willfully contravened our sphere of authority. And unless the administration decides to capitulate now and purge the contempt, at which point I would say we've backed away from the constitutional crisis. We got there and then we came back. But if they don't do that, then we're in full, then Katie barred the door. But, you know, Paige, I have to just take this moment to say that for Democracy Docket premium members, I wrote to them about this more than a month ago. In February, I wrote to them, and this is like a direct quote. This will not end well for the Trump administration. Federal courts have the power of criminal contempt if necessary. They can appoint their own prosecutors from the private bar. If the U.S. Marshal Service refuses to enforce court orders, judges may all of a sudden find that they have the power to contract privately for that as well. There is old case law that found that power was inherent, at least for Congress. Okay, so that's anticipating a little bit where we go next, which is what happens if the Department of Justice either refuses to prosecute the contempt. As I pointed out, they can appoint their own lawyers. What happens if they prosecute it, but they refuse to enforce it? And it just goes to show that, you know, we talk a lot about people signing up for Democracy Docket, for the free newsletters, for the premium content. And this is a good example why, because this is the kind of content that we have the time to really dig deep into. In February, when no one was thinking about this, we, you know, took the time to dig deep into this and to provide this information to our readers. Take this opportunity, if you're not already, to sign up. If you can become a premium member, I promise you will get a lot more of what I just read on a regular basis in your inbox. If you can't, at least become a free member and you'll get free daily and weekly newsletters from Democracy Docket. But
for sure, Marc, and the team at Democracy Docket will continue to analyze this case and others to report on the latest defiance from the Trump administration and their anti-democratic actions. I want to talk a little more about the consequences of Boasberg's opinion today. It seems like there's kind of two buckets of people affected. You have kind of the DOJ and the executive branch. You have all the people who will ultimately be held responsible for ignoring the judge's order to stop the flights, to stop the deportations. And then you have all of the people who were deported, the Venezuelans who were taken to El Salvador. As you hinted at, we saw earlier this week, we saw President Trump say, we don't have the power to bring people back from El Salvador. And then you saw the Salvadorian president say, we don't have the power to bring those people back to the US. How does it end for the people who were deported when the judge ordered for these deportations to stop?
Right. So first of all, you're right. We're only talking about the subset of people who are on the planes that were in the air after when the judge issued his order. So the folks who went before that are not subject to this. What the judge is basically saying is, look, I can't order those people returned to the United States because the Supreme Court, remember, vacated the ultimate order at issue here. But I can vindicate my court order, and they can purge the contempt. And one way they may be able to purge it is by admitting what they did was wrong, and by giving those people who are on those planes essentially the hearing, the rights they would have had if they had not been sent to El Salvador. In other words, they would have had habeas petition rights, which means they would have an opportunity to present their arguments to a judge, a federal judge, as to why it is they were being wrongfully detained in El Salvador, and that would be one way that this could be handled. They'd be essentially given hearings on an individualized basis. In this case, likely in Texas where they left from, or maybe in Louisiana if they were held there. But anyway, they'd be given a court hearing, not in the DC court, but in wherever they were being held, to say I shouldn't be in El Salvador. So that's kind of the first thing that could happen to them. The second is, let's be honest, like even with those hearings, it's not clear they're coming back, right? So people need to temper their expectations about what is at stake here. The judge is vindicating not the rights of those individuals, but the rights of the court. And that may leave people feeling somewhat, unsatisfied. And I get it. I totally understand why that, doesn't seem to get at the ultimate harm here. But contempt is vindicating the right of the courts to have its orders followed, not necessarily the underlying merits, which is why the judge can say, even though the Supreme Court vacated the underlying order, I still get to do this. I think the most likely next step to get to that is that the administration just says, pound sand, like basically this is a judge out of control, at which point the judge proceeds with the probable cause hearing. The Department of Justice refuses to prosecute it. The judge then appoints private counsel, as I predicted would be the case in my what I wrote to premium Democracy Docket members in February. That maybe gets challenged, even though that's been upheld. That maybe goes up the court system. And then if he does hold them in contempt, then the Department of Justice says, well, that's great, you held them in contempt, but we're not going to enforce your order. The Marshal Service refuses to enforce the order. And now we get into more uncharted territory, which I, again, have written about for premium members. But I also want to give a plug to Democracy Docket because there is a piece on Democracy Docket's free website by Professor David Knoll of Rutgers, and he talks about that part and how there is contemplated in the federal rules the ability of the courts to use private resources in that instance as well. So we're going to get into a lot of nuance about where we go from here and what the options are. Again, there is no better time to tell people to subscribe to Democracy Docket. It is an unbelievably valuable resource right now in this time of great turmoil. And so please, as I mentioned before, the links are above and in the show notes below.
Marc, last question for you. Does Boasberg's opinion today officially mean that we are in a constitutional crisis?
Yeah, I think we are. I think we're in a constitutional crisis. And here's why, Paige. Because a federal judge has found probable cause to believe that the Trump administration has defied one of his court orders. It's not that they made an error. It's not that, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, but rather they willfully, which means on purpose, violated his order. And yeah, it's only a finding of probable cause. It's not a final determination on the merits. Sure, you could say it's not a constitutional crisis because the Trump administration could apologize and purge its contempt. But the reason why I think we're there is, number one, the Trump administration is not going to apologize, and I doubt they're going to try to purge their contempt. But in any event, we've crossed an important threshold. We've crossed a threshold in which the Trump administration's game, and it is a game, their game of playing cat and mouse with federal judges, while at the same time having their allies threatening impeachment. Remember, they were threatening impeachment against this judge. At the same time that they are bad-mouthing the judiciary. At the same time that they are, in other cases, Paige, the case involving the El Salvadorian citizen who was deported, they're supposed to submit a simple progress report or status report every day at 5 p.m., they weren't even meeting the deadline. They were submitting them 5:20, 6 o'clock, right? Willfully just flaunting the court's order. That's before you get to the fact that the content of these status reports didn't meet the judge's requirements. But they are just pushing and pushing and pushing. And now you have a federal judge saying, no, like, I'm going to assert my prerogative to institute contempt proceedings. And I think that this is now going to be a test of wills. And the thing is that, Paige, once that floodgate is open, once one federal judge does it, I suspect we're now going to see other federal judges do it. So yeah, I do think we're in a constitutional crisis. It doesn't mean we can't get out of it. It doesn't mean that the Trump administration can't de-escalate, because there are from time to time constitutional crises, but then we restore back to a constitutional order. So I'm not saying that we've crossed a Rubicon that you can't come back from. But I do think it is fair to say we are now in a constitutional crisis. And that is why I am going to say one more time, if you're watching this video, please subscribe to Democracy Docket. The links are above and in the show notes below. And also, these videos that we do, we get out even quicker than anything else when there is breaking news. So please make sure you're subscribed to this YouTube channel. It's free. And if you also click the notification button, you'll get notified in real time when these videos post. So do that as well. Thank you for watching this special breaking news edition of Democracy Docket on YouTube. We'll see you next time.